The proceeding will start shortly.
Order, order. We start with questions. The Secretary of State for the Home Department, Afzal Khan.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, knife crime, as we have debated often in this House, is a terrible crime. It tears families apart and often, all too often, takes young people from us. As the House will know, violent crime overall has reduced by 51% since 2010, but there is more that we can do. That includes funding violence reduction units, and Manchester's own violence reduction unit has £20 million of funding for the coming financial year, running hotspot policing in areas where serious violence and antisocial behaviour is a problem. And the funding for that, £66 million across England and Wales, is in addition to existing police funding settlement money.
I think it's grouped.
You're quite right, Mr. Speaker, of course, with number 2.
Afzal Khan.
Mr. Speaker, in September 2021, my constituent, Ramiro West, was chased across Manchester, stabbed and killed. He was just 16. His mum, Kelly, has worked tirelessly to make sure no other families have to face the suffering she and her family have to face, including raising money to fund a network of bleed kits across Greater Manchester and a youth project in Fallowfield. She wants to tell Ramiro's story to help save other young lives. So will the Minister agree to meet with her?
Yes, of course I will meet with the honourable gentleman and his constituent. It sounds like she is campaigning, as so many parents do, very bravely to try and bring some good out of a terrible personal tragedy. So yes, of course, I'd be delighted to meet him and his constituent.
Tobias Ellwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I quickly put on record my thanks to the Security Minister and the Police Minister for their efforts in upgrading MPs' security. Mr. Speaker, across the UK, ever more young people are choosing to carry knives, and sadly this is the case in Bournemouth as well. Violence reduction units are the dedicated police units that have a proven track record in other parts of the country that have helped reduce knife crime in town centres, not just through increased policing, but working in the community, including at schools, educating youngsters on the dangers of carrying knives. I'm grateful for the increase in police numbers in Dorset, but could the Minister please ask the Chancellor to see if extra funds could be provided specifically for a violence reduction unit for Bournemouth?
Well, I will indeed convey to the Chancellor his request, and I'd like to put on record my thanks for the campaigning, the tireless campaigning by the member for Bournemouth East, but other Dorset MPs as well, for resources for the county of Dorset and for their police force. Dorset Police will be receiving next year about £11 million more than it was the previous year, thanks to the Right Honourable Member's campaigning and the campaigning by other Dorset MPs. They also received an exceptional special grant last year of £600,000 to help campaign against violence. He's quite right to say that violence reduction units do have a very positive effect. Next financial year, £55 million will be spent on those for the 20 police force areas judged to have the most significant violence problems. Dorset is not amongst those 20, but I know that working with the Police and Crime Commissioner and passing on his message to the Chancellor, I know that Dorset Police and their PCC will do everything they can to combat knife crime in Bournemouth, but in Dorset as a whole.
Shadow Minister Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With incidents up by 70% since 2015, the public are looking for leadership on knife crime. Earlier this month, the government wouldn't support our plan, which includes broadening the ban on zombie knives to include ninja swords, an end-to-end review of online sales, and criminal penalties for tech execs who allow their platform to be used for illicit sales. So the government rejected our plan, but what they have in place simply isn't working. So we will push again during the remaining stages of the Criminal Justice Bill. Will they accept it then?
Well, I think the Shadow Minister should be aware of the fact that according to the Crime Survey of England and Wales, according to the ONS, that is the only reliable long-term indicator for crime trends, volume crime trends, violent crime is down by 51% since 2010. Now, he asked about online knife sales. He should be aware that the Online Safety Bill, now the Online Safety Act, when it is fully enforced, takes very strong action against, for example, online marketplaces, and it will make the illegal sale of knives online a priority offence under Schedule 7 of that bill. He will also know that we are bringing forward legislation to ban a whole range of machetes and zombie-style knives. We define them in relation to the features they have, and, for example, knives over 7 inches in length with 2 cutting edges and serrations will be banned. Those are just some of the measures we're taking, and all of which have helped bring down violent crime by 51% since 2010.
Nickie.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker. Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the government is committed to ending rough sleeping. Huge amounts of money are being invested in getting people off the streets. Rough sleeping levels in England now are 35% lower than they were in 2017. In relation to the Criminal Justice Bill, criminal sanctions where rough sleeping is causing a problem, for example, for businesses, are very much the last resort. The first resort is giving people the support they need to find accommodation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Walking here today, I walked past several rough sleepers sleeping in doorways and in tents. The police already have the ability to move rough sleepers on under a number of different legislations, including the Public Order Act 1986, the Anti-Social Behaviour Crime and Policing Act 2014 and the Highways Act 1980, amongst others. Does the Minister understand my concerns that what is suggested in the Criminal Justice Bill criminalises rough sleepers, does not do anything to help them, and the police already have the powers but are failing to use them?
Well, the various powers that the Honourable Lady lists in the various other pieces of legislation are not precisely the same as those drafted in the Criminal Justice Bill. It's worth saying the Criminal Justice Bill does not criminalise rough sleeping in general. It criminalises particular types of rough sleeping when it causes a nuisance. But that said, the government, as I think I've signalled to various honourable members, including actually the honourable member for the 2 cities privately, the government is willing to look at the way those provisions are drafted, to make sure they are tightly and narrowly drawn, because it is our intention that the first stop is always offering support, and it's only as a last resort, if rough sleeping causes a serious problem, for example, for businesses, that criminal sanctions are appropriate.
Thank you, Amesbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a new Vagrancy Act with bells on as drafted, and rough sleeping is actually up 75% since 2010. Look, rather than criminalising people that happen to be rough sleeping, provide support and build the houses that they need.
Yeah. Well, as I said, my colleagues in DLUC are providing extremely comprehensive packages of support, and rough sleeping is down by 35% since 2017. And is down by 28% since before the pandemic in 2019. As I say, the government is willing to look at changes to make these provisions tightly defined and narrow. The intention is only to have criminal sanctions as a last resort where rough sleeping is, for example, disrupting a business and preventing it operating. But it is a last resort. The first resort will always be offering help and support.
Duguid.
Number 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with your permission, I will group this answer with question 7. On the 4th of December, the government announced a new package of measures to further reduce net migration. These measures include, but are not limited to, stopping overseas care workers from bringing family dependents, increasing the salary threshold for skilled worker visas to $38,700, and raising the minimum income requirement for family visas in stages to $38,700. The changes are being introduced gradually and early in 2024 and are not retrospective.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome the measures taken to reduce abuses of the immigration system, and I also recognise the need to exempt from the new minimum salary those critical occupations for which we have a specific shortage, for example, health and care workers. However, in the Migration Advisory Committee's interim review of the immigration salary list, published on Friday, several occupations have been removed due to discounted salary of around £31,000 being well above the going rate for such occupations. Given the vital and growing importance of food security across this country, will my honourable friend commit to a review of those occupations which, although not the highest tech or highest paid jobs in our economy, are nonetheless critical for our food sector and rural and coastal communities?
Well, there is no stronger advocate for the fishing industry in this House than my honourable friend, and he will appreciate that we have received that return from the MAC. We will now look very carefully at their recommendations, but he knows that we've been flexible as a government consistently in responding to the needs of the fishing sector. I would argue there's more we can do around trying to promote domestic employment, but let us take this away and consider his representations.
Sir Redound.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A key issue often raised by my constituents is a desire to see a dramatic reduction in legal migration, bearing in mind that the opposition appear to have no plan in this regard. Can you reassure me that you're going to look at new ways to stop this and to make sure that everybody has the right to work in this country and we don't decrease the wages by bringing in cheap labour from abroad?
My honourable friend is very supportive, I know, of the holistic approach that the government is taking to this. The measures that we have announced and are taking forward will reduce the inflows by 300,000. It's important to consider this against the back-to-work plan that the Department for Work and Pensions is delivering as well to encourage more people to take on those roles domestically. But she should be absolutely certain that we as government will deliver on these measures. We continue to keep under review as well where we may be able to go further, and it does stand in very stark contrast to the opposition front bench who have no plan at all.
Zora Sultan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To cut a long story short, a constituent's skilled work visa application was mistakenly withdrawn by the Home Office. This error has resulted in him no longer having the right to work in the UK, forcing him and his wife to leave their jobs. His wife is 5 months pregnant, and although they pay the NHS surcharge, the Home Office error means they are again getting healthcare bills. The situation is increasingly desperate, so I ask if the Minister will meet with me to look into this case and to ensure that a Home Office error doesn't do any more harm than it already has for this young couple.
The honourable lady will appreciate that I obviously don't have to hand the specifics of the case in question, but if she could kindly share those with me, I will look into that case as a matter of urgency.
Patrick Wren.
Speaker, I hope the Minister will take this opportunity to recognise that the right to claim asylum is allowed under international law, and therefore there is no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker. And on that basis, perhaps he could tell us whether he or any of the Ministers have met with people with lived experience of the system, and whether they'll meet with the Maryhill Integration Network in Glasgow North to discuss these issues.
He will recognise that actually in relation to a question that I answered from one of his honourable friends, I said I'd be very willing to meet with him and Glasgow colleagues about some of the challenges. That meeting will happen. I've made that undertaking to him, and I will make sure that that happens at the earliest possible opportunity. I'm of course very keen to understand what the challenges are and to make sure that the support that we are providing to help facilitate move-ons, for example, is meeting the needs that exist.
Senator Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Since our last Home Office questions, the list of government failures on immigration has continued to grow relentlessly. 30,000 asylum seekers stuck in limbo, unable to be processed due to the Prime Minister's legislative fiasco. 250 visas awarded to a care home that doesn't actually exist. Net migration trebled, and criminals free to fly into our country undetected on private jets. So I asked the Minister, having just sacked the Independent Inspector for Borders and Immigration, is the Home Secretary sitting on 15 different reports by the Inspector because he's checking for typos, or is it because he's utterly terrified of what those reports will tell us about this government's shambolic and failing immigration system?
Well, to very directly answer the point that was raised there by the Honourable Gentleman, the Shadow Minister, there are these reports that we will respond to, having given proper consideration to them. As I said in the House last week, we will do so very soon. And he mentions the point about government trying to dodge scrutiny. When it comes to the General Aviation Report, for example, it was our own officials that asked the inspector to take forward a report. So far from dodging scrutiny, we've invited it on that area, and we will respond properly and thoroughly to that report in exactly the way that I undertook to last week.
Spokesperson Nelson Tobias.
People who come here to work and study and live make a significant impact on Scotland's economy and to our society, so reducing their number is entirely self-defeating. Reunite Families UK have highlighted the disproportionate impact the Tory changes to visa income thresholds will have on women. I've asked him this before and I've yet to have an answer. When will he publish the full equality impact assessment on this damaging policy?
We will publish the Equalities Impact Assessment that is associated with this policy in due course. She will appreciate that the government's position is a very clear one, that the current levels of net migration are not sustainable. We need to take forward a set of policy measures that deal with that promote domestic employment wherever possible. I think that there is a very strong moral case for the approach that we are taking. None of the measures that are being applied are retrospective, but we're absolutely convinced that this is the right thing to do and that the British people think that action is needed and action is what they're getting.
I spent a lot of time this weekend with members of the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain, the Glasgow branch. They put on a significant demonstration and a service in Glasgow Cathedral at the weekend, marking 2 years since the escalation of Russian aggression in Ukraine. But the changes that the government is making to the Ukraine scheme came with very little notice and did cause a great deal of uncertainty and distress in this community. So can he tell me, for example, whether a wife whose husband has been injured fighting on the front line against Putin's war machine will be able to sponsor her husband to come here under these restricted rules?
Again, as we debated in the House last week, we as government are very proud of the amazing response that we have seen from people across this country opening their homes for Ukrainian refugees. There will continue to be an out-of-country route through the Homes for Ukraine scheme to facilitate people being able to come here from Ukraine. Ukrainian refugees here in the UK will be able to extend their visas. We've given that certainty way ahead of the curve when you consider our international partners. And Ukrainian nationals who would have qualified under the Ukraine Family Scheme will still be able to apply under Homes for Ukraine.
Gill.
Question number 5.
I thank the Honourable Lady for the question. She's aware that the Government is continually assessing the potential threats to individual rights and freedoms and safety across the United Kingdom. And I thank her for the effort she's made to represent her views to me in a different forum. Whenever we identify such threats, we will always use every measure at our disposal, including our intelligence services, to mitigate any threat to individuals. And in the first instance, I would urge anyone concerned for their safety to contact the police. She will also be aware, no doubt, that the National Security Act recently introduced includes measures to tackle foreign interference, including transnational repression. And the Defending Democracy Task Force is reviewing the UK's response to develop our understanding of the issue and ensure a system-wide response.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Transnational repression to silence dissent in democracies is extremely serious. And in recent months, Five Eyes nations have raised concerns about the actions of agents with links to India targeting Sikh activists here in the United Kingdom. Most disturbingly, there has been alleged assassinations and foiled assassination plots. And the US and Canadian authorities have taken the lead at senior levels to publicly call out this challenge to their sovereignty, to the rule of law and their democratic values. Given reports of British Sikhs facing similar threats, what steps is the government taking to secure their safety? And will he show the same strength as our partners to publicly defend their democratic rights? Thank you.
Let me be completely clear. If there are any specific threats against any British citizen by any foreign power, we will take immediate action. The Sikh community should be as safe in the United Kingdom as every other community in the United Kingdom. All British citizens are equal, whatever their colour, creed, faith or political allegiance. The reality is that we have taken all the action we believe is appropriate at this stage. We maintain a very close relationship, of course, with our Five Eyes partners, and we are absolutely clear that when or if the situation changes and we need to take action, we will do so.
Shadow Minister Dan Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Russia's deadly poison attack in Salisbury, Iran's intimidation of Iran international journalists, and China's secret police stations have long showed the need for a robust strategy to counter transnational repression on British soil. The Minister mentioned that a review is underway into the UK's approach to transnational repression. So, can I ask him, when does he think that the review will be published, and will this sit as part of a wider strategy to counter hostile state activity in this country?
Yes. Can I thank the honourable members for his question? This review is underway at the moment, and it's including many different elements from different communities around the world who are now settled happily in the United Kingdom. He'll understand that I'm not going to go into individual details, but certain communities, for example, the Hong Kong Chinese community that is now very welcome in the United Kingdom under a policy that this government introduced, and I'm very proud of the number who have taken asylum and who have taken the opportunity as British nationals overseas to settle here, are one of the communities that has been particularly targeted, but we are looking at others. We're open to any reports of transnational repression, and we are listening.
Please.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to group this question with number 19. Since 2019, we've invested £160 million into 20 violence reduction units across England and Wales, with a further £55 million committed this year. Violence reduction units have reached over 270,000 young people, bringing together specialists from health, police, local government and community organisations, not just to tackle violent crime, but to identify the young people who are most at risk of being drawn into it and providing evidence-based interventions to support them.
For that answer, Mr. Speaker. Children as young as 12 have been recruited by local drug dealers in the central wards of Stockton and provided with pocket money, quite a huge sum to them, to carry and deliver Class A and B drugs. Many of them are enthralled to their balaclava-wearing controllers who largely act with impunity. Now, the police and other agencies, well, they're working very hard to combat this organised crime, but Cleveland has the highest crime rate in the country, and police and councils don't have fair funding needed to deal with the criminals, nor provide good diversionary activities for these vulnerable young people. What will the Minister do to sort this out?
Well, I can reassure the honourable gentleman that under our Tackling Organised Exploitation programme, we are keenly aware of the difference between victims and criminals, and we are aware that children are being drawn into criminal enterprises, criminal gangs at ever younger ages. I want to provide some reassurance that where we have evidence of this happening, a child should be referred through the National Referral Mechanism, the framework for identifying victims of exploitation by county lines groups and equivalent. This can be done with or without the child's consent and provides the police with a vital tool not just to protect the child but to disrupt the criminal activity in which they are being enlisted.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, Bedfordshire Police reported that 2 drug dealers who had trafficked a vulnerable 15-year-old child from Luton to sell drugs were sentenced under modern slavery laws. While this conviction is of course welcome, I think we can all agree that this isn't just slavery. This is the despicable act of grooming children into a life of drugs, gangs and violence. So why doesn't the government back our plans for a new specific offence to lock up these criminals for exactly what they're doing and to stop exploiting children and young people for a life of crime?
Well, I agree with much of what the Honourable Lady said. The Prime Minister implemented new measures dealing with child sexual exploitation in April of last year, but part of that was dealing with organised exploitation, which goes wider. I'm glad to hear that those 2 criminals were convicted under modern slavery laws, and I just want to reassure her that also grooming gangs are having enhanced sentences under our criminal justice bill, which is making its way through the House now.
Teresa Villiers.
It's deeply disturbing when children and young people are involved in violent crime, and experience around the world does show that a real whole-of-government approach is crucial in tackling this problem. That's acknowledged in successive government strategies. Will the Minister give us an update on how the government is ensuring that's delivered?
If I've understood the Honourable Lady's question directly, we are doing a huge amount in the area of child exploitation. Only last week, actually, we implemented the #1 recommendation of the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse on mandatory reporting. We have more to come, and this remains a government priority.
The Minister for Health.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Minister says that they're doing loads, but since 2018, in some areas of the country, there has been a huge increase in the number of weapons seized in schools, with knives and tasers found in some instances. Our young people continue to bear the brunt of Tories' decision to hollow out youth services and prevention work in our communities. Meanwhile, ninja swords and weapons remain just a Google search away. Parents should not fear for their children's safety at school. So when will the government match Labour's ambition with our Young Futures programme and prioritise safety and opportunities of our young people?
Well, Mr Speaker, I make no apology for the success of our violence reduction units and the difference they've made to young people's lives since 2019. My honourable friend, the policing minister, made the point that the crime survey for England and Wales shows there has been a 51% fall in violent crime since 2010. But more than that, our violence reduction units, working in conjunction with our GRIP hotspot policing, have delivered a statistically significant fall in violent injuries. Hospital admissions for knife crime and equivalent have fallen by 25% since 2019. And nationally, knife crime overall has fallen by 5% since 2019. That's all just in the life of this Parliament. We've banned zombie knives, cyclone knives, and we're giving more powers to the police under our Criminal Justice Bill to make preemptive seizures.
James White. Number 9, please.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Decisions on bail conditions are obviously set, enforced and monitored locally, but it is very important that where bail conditions, police bail conditions, are set down, they are adhered to in order to protect the public.
James Wild. 3 of my constituents' family were killed in an appalling dangerous driving case, and the offender was on police bail at the time with curfew conditions for a separate offence. Given legislation does not allow for tagging in such cases to enforce those curfew conditions, will my honourable friend looking at bringing forward changes to the law so that electronic monitoring can be used for offenders released on post-charge police bail?
I think my honourable friend raises a very important point, informed obviously by a tragic case in his own constituency. He is right that the legislation as it stands does not allow for tagging of people who are on simply police bail, that is to say before their first appearance at court. There are some considerations to do with whether tagging constitutes a form of punishment and whether that's appropriate prior to a court hearing. However, he is raising a reasonable point, informed by a constituency case, so yes, that is something I'd be happy to take away and look at with him.
Buchan.
Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for that response. Minister, obviously we in Northern Ireland, with a renewed and reinvigorated Northern Ireland Assembly with a Minister in place, we'll be very, very keen to work alongside the Minister and have some of those suggestions that he's referred to. Could I ask the Minister, would he do so and contact the Policing and Justice Minister at the Northern Ireland Assembly to ensure that what's going to happen here can happen to us in Northern Ireland and we can all gain advantage? Thank you.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question. It's very good news, of course, that the Northern Ireland Executive has been restored. Policing is, of course, devolved, so the Assembly and Executive in Northern Ireland can set their own policy. But if they'd like any information about the policies we're pursuing here in the England and Wales jurisdiction, of course, I'd be very happy to share them and to work constructively and collaboratively with all of the devolved administrations, including the one in Northern Ireland.
Andrew Salou.
Number 10, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, we have very regular discussions with Chief Constables around the country about local policing. In fact, I had a discussion with the Chief Constable of Staffordshire about some local policing issues there just this morning. And it is a dialogue that happens on a regular and ongoing basis. Police Chief Constables are, of course, operationally independent, but we work very closely in partnership with them.
Andrew Salou.
Leighton Buzzard, Dunstable and Hatton Regis are the 3rd, 4th and 5th largest towns in Bedfordshire, and yet they have a fraction of the police officers based in Luton and Bedford. So will he speak to the Chief Constable to make sure that we get a fairer allocation of the record number of police officers we have in Bedfordshire spread across the county with a 24/7 first responder presence?
Well, my honourable friend is a doughty champion for his part of Bedfordshire. He is quite right to say Bedfordshire, in common with many other parts of the country, and indeed England and Wales as a whole, has a record number of police officers. In the case of Bedfordshire, 1,456. And of course, across England and Wales as a whole, we now have over 149,000 officers, more than we've ever had before, and over 3,000 more than we had under the last Labour government. I speak regularly to Chief Constable Trevor Rodenhurst and Police and Crime Commissioner, the excellent Police and Crime Commissioner in Bedfordshire, Festus Akinbusoye. Now, of course, how they deploy their headcount, their record headcount, is a matter for them rather than government. But I will certainly mention the issues that he is raising when I next speak to him. I think we're having a meeting quite shortly, and I know the honourable member will mention these issues as well.
John Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've had to seek extra police support this weekend due to the far-right abuse that I have suffered, inspired and unleashed in part by the conspiracy theory, the racist, Islamophobic, anti-Muslim hate peddled by members for Ashfield, Fareham and South West Norfolk.
You can't name members. Those names, you cannot name members. John Butler.
Mr. Speaker, peddled by members of the government party. Does the Minister agree that there is no place in this House or society for such divisive language? One member has had the whip removed. Does the Minister agree that other members should have the whip removed? Or does the Minister agree with those points made?
I think this House as a whole should be clear that hatred based on religion or based on race has no part at all in a civilised country, whether that's directed towards members of the Jewish community who have suffered a surge in anti-Semitism, or members or hatred directed towards the Muslim community. This party on this side is prepared to act extremely quickly and did so at the weekend, a great deal faster than the party opposite when they had an issue in Rochdale.
Jonathan Gullis.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the Minister made reference to his meeting with the Chief Constable of Staffordshire Police after the disgusting hate mob that appeared outside a Stoke-on-Trent Conservative fundraiser on Friday, where a police officer has appeared to allow members of the public who were spewing their hatred into the venue, into the private function room, to intimidate, to harass and to bully members old and as young as 11 years old. That meant including one individual that used to be a member of the now proscribed terrorist organisation, Hizb ut-Tahrir. Is it not about time that we in this House stand up and make it very clear, because I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but the actions of last week emboldened these individuals to take the action they did. And therefore, isn't it about time that we make a clear voice that democracy will not be subdued in this way?
Yes, it is important we make clear in this House that any form of intimidation or harassment of members of Parliament, of elected councillors, or of anyone engaging in political activity, including attending political events, should be able to do so without intimidation, without harassment. No one in this House should feel they have to change their vote or change procedure as a result of external pressure. And what happened in Stoke City on Friday evening was completely unacceptable. A political meeting was disrupted and indeed closed down by protest. That is unacceptable. I met this morning with the Chief Constable and Police and Crime Commissioner of Staffordshire to make that clear. I also spoke this morning to the Chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, Chief Constable Gavin Stevenson, to make the same point. And I'm pleased to report to the House that 4 people have now been arrested in relation to the incident in Stoke City on charges under Section 4A of the Public Order and under Section 68 of the Criminal Justice Public Order Act.
Sorry, Minister. We both can't be stood at the same time. Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has he had a chance recently to talk to the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner of Devon and Cornwall, which has been in special measures since 2022 and is now being sued by 7 former and serving women police officers for failing to deal with rapes, emotional abuse and beatings over a number of years? And what can you do to reassure the public in Devon and Cornwall that these allegations will be thoroughly independently investigated and any wrongdoing acted on? Shocking.
Well, of course, we have the Independent Office of Police Conduct to make sure that there is an independent body available to investigate serious allegations about police forces or about their conduct of particular investigations. In relation to the Engage process, the Chief Inspector of Constabulary chairs regular PPOG meetings, the Police Performance Oversight Group, where forces in Engage are particularly looked at and overseen. Devon and Cornwall is one of those, along, of course, with the West Midlands and London.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And local policing is really important. I had some good news from my Police and Crime Commissioner, Alison Hernandez, that Liscard is to have a new police inquiry office. Would my honourable friend join me in welcoming this and look to see what further funding is available for this to happen in other towns?
Minister. Well, I pay tribute to the excellent Police and Crime Commissioner, Alison Hernandez, for the work she's done getting that Lisgard Centre open. And, of course, I pay tribute to the member for South East Cornwall for her work, tireless work, campaigning on behalf of Devon and Cornwall Police. Devon and Cornwall Police now have 3,718 officers. That is a record. And next year, they will be receiving £28 million more funding compared to the current financial year, providing plenty of money to invest in services, as the member quite rightly requests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for everything you do to keep members of Parliament safe. I know so much of it goes unseen. Talking to residents in Hull West and Heswell, they're deeply concerned about the rise in antisocial behaviour. Antisocial behaviour is not trivial. It has a huge impact upon neighbourhoods and a huge impact on the mental health of the people subjected to it. So why is the government failing to take it seriously?
Well, I mean, with great respect, that is complete nonsense. The government published an antisocial behaviour action plan just last year. From April of this year, just a couple of months' time, every single police area in England and Wales will have funding, £66 million in total, to run hotspot patrols in areas where there are antisocial behaviour or serious violence problems. We have 10 force areas running pilots for immediate justice, where people committing ASB have to do immediate reparations. We banned nitrous oxide on the 8th of November last year. So there's an action plan, it's being implemented, and every single police force is having money to run hotspot patrols to combat ASB.
Olivia Blake.
Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We continue to provide safe, habitable and fit-for-purpose accommodation for asylum seekers who would otherwise be destitute. The Home Office has established procedures to hold contracted accommodation providers responsible for the provision of safety, security and well-being of asylum seekers. In addition, asylum seekers have access to a 24/7 helpline to raise concerns and make formal complaints.
Olivia Blake.
Recent tragic events demonstrate that even those who are at risk of suicide are ignored after repeatedly raising concerns about their mental health in asylum accommodation. Why then has the Minister changed the allocation of asylum accommodation policy to make it harder for people to prove that they are at risk of harm at a particular site? Will they learn the lessons from December's tragic incident?
Well, I don't accept the depiction that the Honourable Lady paints of the situation. We, of course, make appropriate case-by-case decisions about the accommodation arrangements for individuals, reflecting the needs that they have, with proper referrals made, as you would rightly expect, to any other agencies that may be required to ensure somebody's health or well-being, or that any safeguarding issues are properly addressed. And there is, of course, the migrant help support that is available for people to be able to access 24/7 to raise any issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Question 12.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And joint working with our French partners is crucial to stopping the boats, and thanks in no small part to that joint working, small boat crossings were down by 46% last year.
Sir Michael.
Thank my right honourable friend for his answer. Now, my spies tell me that he was in France just 9 days ago. Hope that's correct. Has he learned any lessons, or were there any lessons to be learned from the French authorities about more cooperation that can go on to stop the boats even further?
I'm very grateful indeed to my honourable friend, and he's right, I was in France 9 days ago, and even whilst I was there, there was a seizure of a boat, but he's right, more needs to be done. Personnel, equipment and technology, they are the key. That's the key to breaking the business model of these criminal gangs. And having met the new Préfet du Nord, Mr. Speaker, I'm in no doubt that this is a joint mission.
Drew Bridgen.
Can the Minister update the House on the number of these illegal migrants who've crossed the Channel currently being accommodated in hotels at the expense of the public purse? And how does that compare with the number of UK nationals currently homeless or sleeping rough?
I can confirm to the honourable gentleman that, in fact, the government has beaten its target of closing 50 hotels by the end of January, and I'm sure that is something that the honourable gentleman will want to welcome.
Daniel Kuczynski.
Question 13, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Home Office has been clear that use of hotels is a temporary and short-term measure to ensure we met our statutory obligation to accommodate destitute asylum seekers during a period of unprecedented numbers of small boat arrivals. We're making significant progress in closing hotels, with over 64 hotels closed by the end of January.
I'd like to thank the Minister for that answer. Shrewsbury has more listed buildings than any other town in England. We benefit from this beautiful architecture which attracts a huge amount of tourism from around the United Kingdom and overseas. But our top hotel in the centre of Shrewsbury is being used to house illegal migrants. We were given an assurance that this hotel would be taken out of this use, and yet we have heard nothing further from the Minister or his department. When will the Lion Hotel in Shrewsbury revert back to its normal use, housing tourists?
It's certainly the case that I haven't given an assurance to that effect, but I know that my honourable friend will welcome the fact that we are tracking ahead of profile when it comes to closing hotels, that the number of people accommodated in hotels is going down, and we will continue to make progress on this issue to allow closures to happen. I hear his representations about the hotel specifically in his constituency. We are committed to this. We're making progress and we'll see it through.
Jim Farrell.
Speaker, obviously the overwhelming majority of those who are seeking asylum and who are in residential accommodation here desperately don't want to be in that accommodation. Yeah. They want their application to be heard and processed quickly. And the Minister knows himself that around 3/4 of those people will be granted asylum in this country. Does he agree with me that part of the process, surely, whilst a person is waiting for their hearing and for their decision to be made, is that we should be looking at integration for those people? And given that, isn't it time to give those seeking asylum the right to work in this country? So good for them morally, but also good for the government and the taxpayer, because it'll mean they'll contribute to their own upkeep.
Excellent question.
It's fair to say that such an approach would simply make a mockery of our legal migration system, people playing by the rules, people lodging applications, paying the appropriate fees. It is right that where people are granted asylum, that we support them to be able to move on as quickly as possible. Work is a key part of that. I just wish he had the same energy behind trying to help more of our people domestically to be able to take on these roles, rather than saying that we ought to resort to migrant labour all the time.
Sir Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 14.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Figures for local policing started to be published in 2015. There were at the time 61,083. The most recent figures from March last year showed they had increased by 6,000 to 67,785.
Sir Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With a growing number of my constituents not even reporting crimes because they don't have access to a public police station, will the Minister reconsider additional funds to ensure that local police stations like Tamworth are reopening public-facing police desks?
Well, Staffordshire Constabulary next year will receive an extra £16 million compared to the current financial year, so a significant increase. They have over 2,000 police officers as part of our Uplift programme, which has seen record-ever police numbers across England and Wales.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker. One of the most common occurrences when it comes to reporting crime in Rother Valley is burglary, either to rob homes or to break into homes and steal car keys for car theft. Does the Minister agree with me that every area, especially in South Yorkshire, have a dedicated burglary police team to deal with those sort of particular issues to make sure we clamp down on such awful crimes?
Well, of course, the previous Home Secretary was successful in securing a commitment from police to make sure that every residential burglary has a visit from the police. But I think the idea he's promoted there about a dedicated burglary task force is an excellent idea, which I commend to all police and crime commissioners.
We now come to topicals. Chris Stevens.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll make a brief statement. Mr. Speaker, over the past few weeks, we've seen disgraceful attempts to intimidate this House, to undermine the democratic process, and to spread fear among those who've been elected to represent our country. This is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. It must end. To this House, I want to say clearly that the government will defend our democracy. We are working with the police and with Parliament to ensure that disagreements are resolved in this House through debate, not outside with threats of violence. And to those who seek to threaten this House, I say this: we will not be cowed, we will not be intimidated, and we will not be silenced. We will do whatever is necessary to protect those elected to represent us, to safeguard our freedoms, and to protect our rights. And I know I speak for colleagues across the whole House when I say we will always act in the interests of our constituents and our country.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for that answer. He will be aware that there has been a 335% increase in Islamophobic hate cases in the UK since the 7th of October and a 589% rise in anti-Semitic incidents compared to 2022. This is affecting our most marginalised and vulnerable groups. So what steps he is taking to protect worshippers, faith schools and reduce unprecedented levels of hate across these islands?
Can I thank the honourable member for that question? Over the last year, this government has increased the funding to the Community Safety Trust by about £3 million. That's taken the total to about £18 million. Now, we've spent a similar amount on other places of worship, and in fact, only last week I was approving the spending on security measures to mosques and churches around this country, exactly to counter the kind of hate crimes that he is describing. We've engaged with not just the Community Safety Trust, but also organisations like Tel Mama that do a fantastic job in engaging with us on anti-Muslim hatred. And I think it's extremely important that we all work together, not just to support and protect every religion and every community in our country, but to make sure that we lower the tension so that we can all be free to express our views.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stealing from small convenience stores is causing concern, both because of the financial impact on owners, but also the threat of violence towards staff. I'm grateful to the Minister for meeting me and colleagues to discuss this last week. I pay tribute to the Thames Valley Police and Crime Commissioner Matthew Barber for his excellent retail crime strategy. But can my honourable friend set out the way the government plans to tackle these thefts and threats?
Yes, well, it's a very serious issue. The government has a retail crime action plan agreed with police. This includes making sure that police always attend when a suspect is detained, where police attendance is needed to secure evidence or where there has been an assault. It also includes always following up every single line of inquiry where retail crime occurs, including running the footage of the offender through the facial recognition database and identifying and going after the criminal gangs that are often behind shoplifting.
Shadow Secretary of State Vet Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, Tel Mama reported that anti-Muslim hate incidents have trebled. It follows recent reports anti-Semitic incidents have hit a record high. We must all challenge all forms of threat, prejudice, racism and hate. So when ministers heard the words from the former Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party of a Muslim mayor saying that his mates are Islamist extremists and that he has been taken over by Islamists, is any Home Office minister now prepared to stand up and say that not only were those words about the London mayor wrong, but they believe they were Islamophobic and should be condemned as such?
Within 24 hours of those words being used, this Prime Minister took immediate action in removing the whip from that individual. If only all leaders of every political party were as quick in removing the whip from those who spread hatred in our community as Rochdale sadly demonstrates, they don't.
Vet Cooper.
I'm sorry that the Minister, who I know takes issues seriously, chose not to respond to the question that I asked. Because rightly, on all sides of the House, we have called out and condemned anti-Semitism and must continue to do so. But if government ministers cannot openly challenge Islamophobia, they play into the hands of extremists, both far-right and Islamist extremists, and he will know that hate crime fuels extremism. If the government took any of this seriously, they wouldn't have just ditched plans for a new hate crime strategy or left it 9 years to update the countering extremism strategy. So does he agree? It's not just their inability to say the words, it's their failure to act that is leaving our communities exposed.
I'm sorry that the Honourable Lady doesn't see the action as clearly as others in this House do. The whip was removed immediately because anti-Muslim hatred is wrong. There is no hierarchy in hatred. There is no hierarchy in racism. It is all wrong. Anti-Muslim hatred is wrong, and the support that some have given to Islamist communities in our country is tragic, and this government will work against it. That is exactly why we have prescribed Hizb ut-Tahrir, because we will work against hatred from whichever community, in whatever way it comes.
Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that the government is looking to further restrict the ability of sex offenders to change their names. But shouldn't we be imposing at least the same restrictions, or perhaps an outright ban, on those convicted of murder from changing their names, because they can continue to be a threat to the victims of those they murdered?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. The Home Office explored whether a name change ban should be extended to murderers and determined that the operational need did not exist. Anyone convicted of murder automatically receives a life sentence. If they're released from prison, they're managed by probation for the remainder of their life, and they remain under an obligation to notify probation within 72 hours of any change of their name. Should they fail to do so, they face immediate recall to prison and up to an extra 5 years behind bars. And so far, we feel that that is working adequately.
Nickie Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next month it will be 4 years since the publication of the Cross-Party Youth Violence Commission report, which recommended violence reduction units. However, knife crime and serious violence is soaring across the country. So does the Minister accept that his government's severe cuts to police numbers, which means we're at the bottom of international ranking tables, is leaving our young people and communities without the protection they need?
I mean, perhaps I haven't said often enough in this chamber that we now have record-ever numbers of police officers across England and Wales, including in the Metropolitan Police area, which has the highest number of police officers per capita of any police force in the country. Despite that, I was disappointed to see in the recent figures published that across the rest of the country, excluding London, knife crime went down, whereas on Sadiq Khan's watch in London, it went up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2010, the period of service to be eligible for a Police Long Service Medal changed from 22 years to 20 years. Sadly, no decision was made to award this retrospectively, meaning that people like Sedgley resident Guy Hewlett, who had served 20 years with distinction, were in fact excluded. This seems to be fundamentally unfair. Will the Home Secretary agree to look into this unfairness, as a simple remedy could be found to recognise officers who served for the minimum 20 years pre-2010?
Well, changes of this nature generally aren't applied retrospectively. I will look at the matter again, but normally when a length of service period is changed, it applies prospectively rather than retrospectively, but I will have a look at the issue.
Mira Wilson.
Speaker, last month, tragically, a young man was stabbed to death at Strawberry Hill Station in my constituency. The Minister will know that the key to tackling violent crime is intelligence-led community policing, but despite his previous answer, we've seen police officers cut by a third since 2015 and regular abstractions from my constituency into central London. So when will the Minister ensure that my constituents have a visible policing presence again so they feel safe?
Well, I'm sure that's a question she'll be posing to London's Police and Crime Commissioner Sadiq Khan in the course of the upcoming mayoral election. But I would point out that thanks to government funding, the Mayor of London, the Metropolitan Police, in common with England and Wales, does now have record ever police numbers. It's about 35,000 in the case of the Met, 149,000 in the case of the rest of the country. And London does, in fact, have not only the highest per capita funding of any force in the country, it also has the highest number of officers per capita of any force in the country. So Sadiq Khan really has no excuse at all.
Baker.
Under the new changes, we know that the minimum income threshold for family visas is being raised incrementally over the next year. However, the only date that we've been given so far for that threshold increase is the 11th of April 2024. For people that are planning to get married, in which case making wedding plans like my constituents, can the Minister set out when we will have further clarity and the update on the timetable for announcing those future thresholds?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I recognise his desire for certainty around this. What I can say is that we expect to complete this reform in early 2025, with further staging posts to come. We are, of course, carefully monitoring the implementation through the period of delivering the initial increase, and I think that it's right that we go about this in that incremental way to give certainty to people.
McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Bristol, we have sadly seen a number of young people killed by knife crime in the last few weeks. We have a Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner, but unlike the Minister, I have no desire to party politicise this. Can I ask him what he's doing to work with the Department of Education to make sure that schools are involved in trying to lead the fight against knife crime and young people getting involved, whether as victims or as the perpetrators?
Well, the Youth Endowment Fund, led by John Yates, has received a £200 million endowment, and their mission is to work with young people, including working with schools in the way she has described, to identify the most effective interventions to try and stop young people getting onto the wrong track, a track that can often have very tragic consequences. So it's through the work of the Youth Endowment Fund, but also the work of violence reduction units in the 20 police force areas most effective. They're spending £55 million a year. They're working together to make those interventions, work with schools to keep our young people safe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a recent night out in Wrexham, known as a nurse as well as the MP, I was asked to help police with a man who had collapsed. As I commenced cardiac resuscitation, the emergency call handler said the first responder would be with us in 1 hour 15. Fortunately, the man stabilised, then came the wait. Now, we're well used to this level of service provided by the Welsh Labour Government, but has the Minister assessed how much time is lost by the police attending emergency services?
Well, of course, first of all, I thank the Honourable Lady for her work helping the community in the way that she's done. It's really an exemplary example of service. So the police will, of course, help where there is a threat to life or threat to safety. The police will intervene where there's criminality. But where there are none of those things, where it's purely medical, for example, someone having a mental health crisis, then it is for the NHS to respond, and the nationwide rollout of Right Care, Right Person across England, and I hope soon across Wales as well, will make sure it is a medical response that comes where it's needed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yew Lodge Hotel in the northwest Leicestershire village of Kegworth continues to accommodate 230 male illegal migrants. How much longer will this blight be inflicted upon my constituents by the government?
Well, the honourable gentleman, of course, doesn't make any mention of the fact that one of the hotels in his constituency is being closed, which perhaps he might like to welcome. He should actually be back in the government. The government is getting on, is closing these hotels. We are tracking ahead of profile when it comes to these closures. And we also have a credible plan to bring the inflow of numbers coming down across the channel via illegal means.
Sir Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to the projection of an anti-Semitic terrorist-originating slogan onto Big Ben last week, the Police Commissioner claims he is powerless. This is utter nonsense. Amongst other options, police could use Section 4A of the Public Order Act 1986, using threatening, abusive or insulting words or behaviour with intent to cause harassment, alarm or distress. It was behaviour, and it was insulting to Jews and many others. Police could also have reasonably feared a breach of the peace, ordered the removal of the projection machine, and if there was non-compliance, arrest the individual for obstructing a constable under the Police Act. I have personally prosecuted these offences. Now, police who fail to do their duty can be disciplined for neglect of duty. Will the Minister act?
Yes, well, I'm sure all members of this House were horrified when those political statements, one of which impliedly called for the destruction of Israel, were beamed onto Big Ben. It was totally unacceptable. It was also, by the way, in breach of planning law as well. I do expect the police to take action. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the former Attorney General, has set out a number of grounds on which action could have been taken, and he can rest assured I have forcefully communicated that to the Commissioner already.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr Speaker, my constituent has been waiting for his asylum substantive interview for well over 18 months. He sat for 4 hours waiting for an interview to start, which was then cancelled with no explanation being given. Clearly there's systemic issues, but can we look at this particular case so that it can be resolved?
I know that the Honourable Lady will welcome the improvements that we are making in relation to the processing of asylum claims, which is reflected in the way in which the legacy backlog has been dealt with. But if she could provide the specific details to me, I'll certainly ask the team to have a look at that quickly.
Heather Wheeler.
Mr Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend, the Minister of State, for not only closing the Asylum Hotel, the 4-star Newton Park Hotel, early in February, 26 days early. The villages and the people that use the V3 bus service are extremely grateful for this very exceptionally good practice. Thank you.
Well, can I just pay tribute to my honourable friend for her work in representing the views of her constituents on this issue. She firmly backs the government's plan, which is allowing us to get on and close hotels such as the one in her constituency, and we will continue to make progress to deliver on our commitments.
Morris.
Banking protocols clearly state that banks should contact the police when they detect fraud. A vulnerable constituent of mine was stopped by HSBC, quite rightly, from carrying out a bank transfer to fraudsters in South Africa. But by failing to notify the police, the fraud continued, resulting in my constituent losing over £32,000 transferred using Apple gift cards. What advice can the Minister give? What recourse does my constituent have to recover this money from HSBC? Because if they had followed the protocols laid down, appropriate safeguards would have been put in place.
So I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising this. Fraud is a blight on our society and leaves many people feeling vulnerable and indeed extremely nervous to use the online services and the wider economy. I'm delighted to say that fraud is already down 13%, and there's more we're doing on this. And I would urge his constituent to follow the advice of the advertising campaign which we're launching, which is Stop, Think, Fraud. Now, this is a huge issue that we're working with police forces around the country on, and that's why we've got 400 new police officers in the National Fraud Service and the National Fraud Intelligence Unit.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Last September, my private member's bill, which made public sexual harassment a criminal offence, attained royal assent. Will the Minister say when that Act of Parliament will be commenced and when guidance to police forces will be issued?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his question. It was a pleasure to support that bill as it went through the House. I can't say exactly when it will be commenced, but I hope he'll be reassured to hear that I had a meeting with officials about commencement earlier this month.
Dame Diana Johnson, Chair of the Select Committee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Home Secretary last week fired the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration after he'd lost confidence in him as he went public with his concerns. As the Home Office failed to publish 15 reports from the Inspector, despite an agreement that they would publish within 8 weeks of receipt, and with matters of border security at stake, is Mr David Neil actually a whistleblower?
Yeah. As the Right Honourable Lady knows, Mr Neil's appointment was terminated after he breached the terms of his appointment and lost the trust of the Home Secretary in relation to the reports which she raises. As she would expect, reports and recommendations are always considered carefully by ministers, and they will be published in due course.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The slogan that was projected onto Big Ben last Wednesday was extreme. It was anti-Semitic, and to many it calls for the destruction of Israel, and it is seen as a genocidal statement. Decent people around the country, not just Jews, find this appalling, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree that there are criminal offences that could be used, and will he reiterate his calls to the police to prosecute those responsible?
Yes, I do share the Honourable Lady's view, and as the former Attorney-General, the Right Honourable Member for Northampton North, pointed out just a few minutes ago, there were a number of bases on which the police could have acted to prevent that projection. Big Ben is not a canvas for political campaigning, particularly where those slogans are offensive, deeply offensive in nature, and that is a view I have made very clear to the Commissioner.
No. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I raised on a point of order the case of my constituent Marta Prenga last week and her 2-year-old daughter who was stuck overseas and was assured the Treasury bench would pass on to Home Office ministers their plight. Can I have a meeting, please, with an immigration minister, as this is still unresolved?
I think the honourable gentleman knows that we as ministers are always approachable and accessible, and I'd be really happy to speak to him about that matter.
Final question, Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thames Valley Police have consistently set the pace on combating rural crime, and next year's budget includes provisions to effectively double our rural crime task force. So will the policing minister join with me in congratulating Thames Valley for all they're doing, but more importantly than that, ensure the Home Office learns from their best practice so it can be applied across the whole country?
Well, I would like to pay tribute to Thames Valley's excellent Police and Crime Commissioner, Matthew Barber, for the work he's doing in combating rural crime and more widely. We have funded a rural crime unit as part of the National Police Chiefs Council, but I'm very happy to look at what the excellent work going on in Thames Valley to make sure those lessons are learned across the whole country.
Sorry, point of order, Stephen Flynn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, members across the chamber probably don't need reminded of events last week when an SNP opposition day, which we brought forward a motion seeking to ensure that this House spoke with one voice in favour of ensuring the release of the hostages that are